Live from SABC studios in Auckland Park, Johannesburg. Welcome to this evening's edition of The Watchdog. My name is Vuyo Mvogo, and tonight on the program,
the harassment of young people belonging to the LGBTQI+ community has no place in our country. No place whatsoever.
We'll start with a roundup of some of the Youth Day commemorative events that took place across the country. And with Youth Month coinciding with Pride Month, we bring you a focused conversation on challenges still facing young LGBTQI South Africans. All that coming up in tonight's episode of The Watchdog, which starts right now. The official Youth Day commemorative event was held in Mthatha, where President Cyril Ramaphosa announced government plans to introduce a new system that will make it easier for job-seeking youths to apply for positions in the public sector.
In an effort to address the high youth unemployment rates, government is streamlining the process of public sector job applications.
Part of government's commitment to remove the barriers that young people confront when trying to enter the public service, we are reducing the cost and effort of applying for positions. For example, applicants for public service positions are no longer required to submit certificated or certified copies of their educational qualifications and other relevant documents. In the past, you had to compile a pile of all these documents, and that has now been done away with. This simple change will significantly reduce the cost of applying. It will improve the turnaround times and also reduce the administrative burden on government departments.
Ramaphosa says government will reduce the red tape that holds back business growth as a measure to assist young people and to respond to their immediate needs. During the State of the Nation address earlier this year, the president announced that the presidency would set up a unit within the office to reduce red tape to improve the business environment.
We are intensifying our investment drive and removing the red tape that has always held business back from contributing to the growth of our economy to achieve greater employment creation. Alongside these measures, we are harnessing capacity of the state to respond to the immediate needs of young people. It is for this reason that we announced the Presidential Youth Employment Intervention, which is a comprehensive response to the youth unemployment challenge.
Government will establish a digital skills development model that will create under 10,000 jobs.
At the beginning of next month, government will be launching the Future of Work Ambassadors program. This program will focus on improving as well as modernizing the recruitment and retention of youth in the public service. We want our young people to be in the public service. By bringing them in, we want them to modernize, to be part of the modernization of the public service, to contribute to the innovative applications that we want to bring into the public service, and also to increase the capacity of the state. We are pursuing innovative new ways of linking learning with earning. For example, the National Skills Fund is pioneering the pay-for-performance skills development model that will create 8,000 job opportunities for young people in digital skills.
There are also plans to revitalize the National Youth Service, which will contribute to development and nation building. Young people have been implored to rally together to overcome the challenges they face in order to define a new future for this country. Natasha Piri, SABC News, Mthatha in the Eastern Cape.
Natasha Piri at the official commemorative event that was held in Mthatha, where President Ramaphosa outlined government's plans and thoughts for young people in this country. Of course, several other political parties across the country held their commemorative events. NGOs and civil society organizations also played their part. EFF leader Julius Malema has alleged that there is a video showing President Cyril Ramaphosa counting hard cash in a plane. He says the video could be released soon. Malema was addressing the EFF supporters rally at Makwarela Stadium near Thohoyandou in Limpopo.
The EFF held its rally to commemorate the National Youth Day. Hundreds of the party's supporters attended the rally, which was held at Makwarela Stadium near Thohoyandou. The party's leader, Julius Malema, addressed party supporters about the much talk about conduct of President Cyril Ramaphosa. There's a video which will leak if he's talking too much. It will be released. Leave him. They were inside the plane counting hard cash in dollars.
How do you have a president, a counter who takes rank?
The EFF says it has declared war against President Ramaphosa.
It is only the EFF that can stop the mattress revolution. Ramaphosa, the EFF has declared war on him. Why? The money that he put under mattress, he didn't pay tax on it. Because it is that tax which must come to you and build you roads and build you schools and build you clinics and build you houses. If we keep money in the mattress, there's no tax that will be paid. And without tax, we are poorer. Why not tax? But the president is not paying tax because he uses hard cash.
Some of the party supporters say they're expecting the EFF to fight for job creation.
And then job creation in the form of nationalization of things, because what we are seeing from the ruling party now is that instead of nationalizing things, they are selling the state-owned entities, so they are showing that they will never create jobs for us as youth. So we are here to hold the EFF accountable.
The Youth Day commemoration was also used to celebrate the 7th anniversary of the party student wing, EFF Student Command. Michael Makungo, SABC News, Makwarela, outside Thohoyandou.
The Democratic Alliance had held theirs in Alex in Johannesburg. That's where party leader John Steenhuisen reminded the president that he has not told South Africans where the money stolen from his Palapala farm actually came from. While IFP's Velengosini Hlabisa lamented the state of dilapidating infrastructure in the country, and this, he says, goes unnoticed by the government of the day.
We're still waiting for the album called Truth to come out. But it's been very, very quiet and very silent. And we want to tell the president today that as young people in South Africa, we're not going to stop asking the questions. Where did you get the money? Who gave you the money? Why did you not report it to the police? Why did you send your VIP protection unit over the border that we all pay for?
In 1994, we got freedom as a country of South Africa. And the freedom gave all of us an equal right to vote, and an equal right
to basic education. But the reality on the ground, the 1994 freedom that we got has not changed the poor classroom situation, especially in black communities. Our classrooms are full and overflowing. They are poorly equipped. They are dilapidated. The infrastructure is growing old every day.
The Pan-Africanist Congress and the Azanian People's Organizations commemorated Youth Day jointly with a wreath-laying ceremony at the graves of the leaders of the June 16, 1976 generation. That is Tsietsi Mashinini and Khotso Siatlolo. The two activists were the organizers of the June 16 Soweto uprising. Leaders of both organizations had also led a march in Soweto, whereafter they addressed a joint rally at the Regina Mundi Catholic Church.
Here lies the martyrs of the 1976 generation, Tsietsi Mashinini and Khotso Siatlolo. The two were the organizers of the Soweto student uprising. They died fighting for a decent education for a black child. But their families say education for a black child is worse today than it was 46 years ago.
I think in terms of education, we have not really realized what we wanted to, what we hoped to achieve at June 16, except that English is a medium of instruction, that's fine. But if you look at the standard of education now, you look at the pass mark, you look at the stating of schools, you look at the behavior and of teachers and principals, you look at the schools in Soweto or in townships in general, they are not operating the way they were operating those times.
Tsietsi Mashinini and Khotso Siatlolo were aligned to the Black Consciousness movement, which later evolved into AZAPO. And with a glaring poor standard of education, their contemporaries believe their efforts have been betrayed.
There is no doubt that they have been shortchanged. There is no doubt that their commitment and their sacrifices, as things stand right now, have been betrayed. There is no doubt that they themselves must be saying they feel like they have died in vain. There is no statue for them. Tsietsi and Khotso, no statue anywhere.
And young people are implored to refrain from lamentations and follow in the footsteps of the 1976 generation by liberating themselves from the shackles of poverty.
Our message is that they must stand up. Our message is that young people must organize themselves. And our message is that young people must know that old people have failed them. And they must just pick this spear from the generation of 1976, those who had a courage to go forward and the courage to fight for what they believe rightfully belonged to them. Now today, South Africa is the most unequal society, and the rate of unemployment, in particular amongst youth, is more than 65%, and this is what we're talking about yesterday in Parliament. Youth is not working, and they must stand up, fight for themselves, and take this country forward.
The joint commemoration of the Youth Day by the PAC and AZAPO followed a joint declaration that the two left-wing parties signed earlier this year to work together and have joint commemorative events. Ntebo Mukobo for SABC in Soweto.
Well, civil society organizations also held commemorative events throughout the country. Unemployment, gender inequity, crime and rate and climate justice were amongst the challenges facing South Africa, in particular young people, and these should be addressed. This emerged from the Ahmed Kathrada Foundation's inaugural parade, which focused on justice and change. It was also part of Youth Day commemorations.
A day to commemorate the bravery of the class of 1976. While they had a common enemy in the form of the oppressive apartheid government of the time, today's youth faces a myriad of challenges including unemployment, gender equity, and high crime rate, among others.
I mean, definitely climate justice, climate change. The earth is melting beneath our feet, and we as the future are really concerned as to like what's going to happen. Yeah, so we definitely want to push for climate justice.
After they finish with school, youth don't know what they're going to do, and they don't have jobs after it.
I think we should be advocating for gender equality, because femicide is a real issue in this country, and a lot of women don't feel safe anymore, and I think that we should use our resources to protect them.
60 organizations advocating for social justice formed part of the inaugural parade organized by the Kathrada Foundation.
We need to start looking at how young people are kept out of or disengaged from decision making around public policy outcomes, right from the very top at national government all the way down to local government. Young people make up the vast majority of this country. Most of them are the black working class poor, and we need to be the ones who are holding the reins of power, directing where things should be going, how things should be organized. Among the issues that we are most engaged with at the moment are things like climate justice and a just transition. This earth belongs to us. This earth is said it is said that we will inherit this earth, and so in order to be able to transform this situation in the benefit of young people and our society at large, we need a structural shift in how our economy is organized.
Our youth are not safe. It can't be the case that we can sit around and see our girls found in institutions of higher learning in suitcases. So we decided to come out today to say, look, personal safety is of great importance, particularly to the youth.
The convener of today's parade, the Ahmed Kathrada Foundation, justified the hosting of this particular event.
Young people are faced with a number of issues, and these stem across joblessness, the rise of gender-based violence, climate issues, and so forth. And today, through a memorandum that was constructed collectively with some of these organizations, we'll be able to express those concerns and what young people believe needs to be done in order to address it.
The youth who formed part of today's parade urged government to also listen to their plight. Offenses Timo, SABC News, Pretoria.
In the Western Cape, learners from various schools across Cape Town gathered at the V&A waterfront, where they ensured their voices were heard. Theirs was a call to end gender-based violence. The non-profit organization, Post to Parliament, says their aim is to foster healing among youth impacted by gender-based violence.
Heart-wrenching messages to those in positions of power, calling for more to be done in a country besieged with high levels of femicide and gender-based violence.
We are trying to tell young people that it is time for them to be heard. We recognize that there's a lot of hurt happening right now. We don't have time for government to execute a grand strategy. We want to provide healing, but amongst youth, for youth, by youth, with youth.
She says the postcards collected will be delivered to the Provincial Minister of Social Development on Monday. Young people from various schools and communities across Cape Town have joined in a host of Youth Day activities hosted at the waterfront. Many say the challenges faced by young people relate to feelings of being and feeling unsafe.
I feel like young people can't express themselves because they feel like they might be doing something wrong or trying to get their attention. But I feel that we are free as ourselves and we are women, and we don't have to feel bad about ourselves. Yes.
South Africa is a place of love, and we must show the love among each other, greeting and getting to know one another. And in this way, we will build bonds with each other, and crime, like violence, will decrease, and it will be a better country for us.
You do get people, girls that hit guys, women that do hit guys. So I would say, yeah, and then you're always going to get girls or ladies that is going to make fun of a guy, you know what I mean? So I say that it's not just gender-based violence against girls, but it's against boys.
We don't feel safe because there's a lot of crime happening, like many youth are being, there's gender-based violence, so we are not safe at all.
We should continue the role
that the forefathers or the previous generation, they set the foundation for us, a solid foundation, because we have freedom in the country today because of them. So we would just we would need to pave the way for the next generation.
The event, titled Be Heard, took the form of a sing-along, enjoyed by young and old in the crowd. The NPO says funds raised will go towards designing the first youth-led curriculum on gender-based violence for grades 6 and 7. Vanessa Puna, SABC News, Cape Town.
Well, only some of the events that were held across the country today commemorating the June 16 uprising, which is now currently known as Youth Day. Now, after the break,
the harassment of young people belonging to the LGBTQI plus community has no place in our country. No place whatsoever.
A focused conversation that is, on challenges still facing young LGBTQI South Africans. Don't go. As the country remembers the June 6, 1976 uprising, where several students took to the streets to protest a merciless apartheid system, many young South Africans across the country continue to be discriminated against, harassed, bullied, persecuted, brutalized, even killed. All because they are lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, queer, or intersex. Youth Month in South Africa coincides with International Pride Month. And tonight on the show, we look at lived experiences of young lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, queer, and intersex South Africa. What can we do from our respective little corners to ensure that they live without fear, without prejudice, without violence, without fearing that they may be killed? My guests are Dr. Ndumiso Ngidi, who holds a Doctor of Philosophy degree and currently works as a senior lecturer at the University of KwaZulu-Natal. Mr. Obvious Nomaele is a Youth Forum alumni, coordinator and facilitator at the Gala Queer Archives in Johannesburg. Works as a filmmaker. Ms. Jade Madingwana is programming officer with the Forum for the Empowerment of Women, FEW. Ms. Tato Mputi is a disability activist and is passionate about sexual and reproductive health and justice. Also an organizer for Women Now at Sister Love Inc., South Africa. Good evening to all of you, and thank you so much for agreeing to come on the program.
Thank you so much for having us.
Good evening. Thank you so much.
Evening to all of you. Dr. Ngidi, if I may start with you. That little clip we played earlier from the president speaking at today's commemorative event, MTATA, a tacit acknowledgement that South Africa is very, very far from ensuring that the lived experiences of the LGBTQI community are better.
Well, thank you so much, Vuya, for having me. It's actually comforting that we have the head of state acknowledging that as much as we have progressive laws that seek to protect the LGBTQI plus community, but there's still much that needs to be done, that they, especially the queer youth, still faces a number of forms of discrimination and bullying and violence and even murder. And so there's quite a lot of work that still needs to be done in order for us to align what is written in policy and in the Constitution with what is happening locally at the ground level and at the community and household level. Just for my own experience with my research work in schools, for example, the issue that might seem minute for other people, but it's quite a big issue for queer learners, particularly those who are trans, the issue of school uniform policies that are discriminatory in nature because they're still based on a very discriminatory gender-based identity, whereas trans boys and girls are still excluded in terms of dressing up in ways that are comfortable for them, ways that are self-expressive and all of that. And there's quite a number of other issues, particularly in schools, but also in communities and households that still face young queer youth in our country. And I'm glad that the president points to those things and acknowledges that we still have a long way to go.
Mm-hmm. Obvious, as Ndumiso was saying, the president it's good that the president is in fact acknowledging the current state of affairs. But as is the case with gender-based violence, for example, I mean, the president talks about it, all the ministers talk about it. New legislation gets put into place. State law enforcement agencies have upped their game somewhat, but in spite all of that, you still have very high levels of gender-based violence in this country, in the same way that you have high levels of discrimination, persecution, and the like with regard to the LGBTQI community.
Yes, I couldn't agree more. I think there's great rhetoric, but the actions don't match the words. It has been a topic. It wasn't actually supposed to be a topic, because if you are trying to offer services to the larger community, everybody should be accounted for. And the fact that every single day youth is out here trying to say, hey, look, we are here, we're facing challenges, and this is what we think should happen, for me is like, okay, yes, you're trying to help the community, but are you aware of the different contexts of which these people occupy? Because the one thing about addressing issues fully is the fact that what one person experiences in Limpopo is not what what another person in Johannesburg would face. I mean, in my queer work with the youth, I mean, I'm only 23, and so far I've actually realized that that's the case. I've been to Free State, and you get there and you realize that there's been a yearning for a queer community, and then you come back to Joburg, you find that it's really a thing. There is community. Now my question is, where do we go? Because what tends to happen is we tend to address issues at the immediate moment and then leave without following up on that, without building stable relationships that will probably create a synergy between other things that we want to do in the future. I mean, even when I was watching the 30 minutes that I've been here, it's like, are they still saying such things? Because in all honesty, we should have been to a point where we're saying, okay, this is what we have done, this is where it has worked, this is where it has failed, but moving forward, what do we then do? But another thing is, you cannot be trying to help people by sitting in your offices and coming up with ways to help them without actually engaging them, going on the ground and saying, hey guys, we're here, we have the resources, and we want to assist you. This is our plan. Do you think it'll work, or do you think it won't? Because I think another thing is, the things that they're trying to do are so much so not in touch or like out of touch with the societies that they're trying to cater for.
Interesting, obvious that you're mentioning that, because that's what I was going to ask Jade Madingwana. Is it for lack of trying on the part of various stakeholders, chief among them the state, for example? Are they, as obvious was saying, doing things without understanding the various or the contexts within which there's harassments, the deaths and the discrimination are all happening?
So I think that South Africa romanticizes death of LGBT persons, right? Because you have the president talking on LGBTI issues this year. Last year, the same thing happened. The president talked about LGBTI issues and the deaths that we were facing within the community, the LGBTI community, right? And I am just thinking about that kind of conversation that we had last year when a lot of LGBTI persons were brutally being murdered because of their sexual orientation or gender identity. This year, again, we have a very high number of LGBTI persons that have just been brutally murdered because of their sexual orientation and gender identity. But we're just talking about it. That's the only thing that we're doing. We're talking about it, and the most influential people, unfortunately, is the government, We've got beautiful laws on paper that talk to queer people having rights in and around South Africa. A lot of people from outside of South Africa say this is the land of milk and honey. But unfortunately, we bear the brunt of seeing LGBTI persons being killed on a daily basis. I mean, in 2021 and 2022, most of these hate crimes that happen on queer bodies have been young people under the age of 30. So what does this say about us? We're celebrating International Pride Month. We're celebrating Youth Day. But just last week, a learner from Orange Farm, Umpo, committed suicide because of discrimination within his school for identifying as gay. So we're doing all of this work as NGO, as these organizations, but we're not getting any assistance from the top level, the government. It's just talking about it. We've got beautiful laws. It's just there. It sits there as just the laws that we have, but on the ground, it's really rough. And queer youth deserve a future, but they're not going to get to that when they are being killed. So it's rather a difficult one. Let's sit. We need to have sessions where we actually, as civil society organizations, sit with the government for a plan moving forward, because we honestly cannot take the deaths of young queer people or just generally LGBTI persons.
Tato, what Jade, some of the things Jade was talking about, one could say are quite ironic, given the fact the widely held view, that South Africa is, largely progressive compared to probably most more countries on the continent, certainly. It leads the way with marriage equality and the legal protection against discrimination. Where is the disconnect?
So thank you so much for that question, Voyo. I think we are seeing a disconnect because like Jade was saying, we have all these laws, but they're not infiltrating down, to the different institutions like your Home Affairs, like your Department of Health, like your Department of Education, where, these are the spaces in which we have to be implementing these laws that have been passed, right? Where same-sex marriage is legal in South Africa, but when you look at customary law, it is not recognized. What does that then say about this marriage that we are talking about in South Africa? When you're looking at things like healthcare institutions, where you still find that if you want to transition as a queer body, you often are judged and asked if you understand or you are sure of what you are doing. And we are not realizing that the systematic barriers and the attitudes of our healthcare providers also perpetuate this hate and this hate crimes that we see. Because I think what people are missing is that they only want to look at a hate crime as something when someone has been brutally murdered. But the same attitude that one is being given when they come and they are a queer body and they want to access reproductive health services, when someone wants to say, these are my pronouns, and people would be talking about things like, we don't have that. We can't call you they, we can't call you them, but you are she, so I think really the laws are there, but these departments are also not communicating to each other, and we still have a long way to go in creating inclusive spaces where also persons with disabilities are recognized even within the LGBTI communities.
Mm-hmm. Ndumiso, I mean, you mentioned earlier, or you cited, perhaps I should say, a few examples, like what's happening at schools with regard to uniform policies, for example. But what are some of the other kind of subtle and perhaps not so subtle things that are happening in the daily lives of LGBTQI plus communities?
So it's quite a lot of things. I always find it cringeworthy, Vuyo, when we compare how progressive South Africa is in comparison to other African countries. Of course, in terms of policy, we seem progressive, but the experiences of queer people on the grounds are still comparable to the rest of countries in Africa. We have people getting killed, we have people getting discriminated against, and everything that the president says or the government says seems to be paying lip service. And I mean, using words such as harassment when really it should be called hate and violence. It's all of those things combined which tell me that queer people in this country are in an unofficial war, and their bodies are getting violated every day. So things that have impact on, when you hear of a queer person getting murdered, that has a traumatic effect on you as a queer person. And so mental health, for example, things that are not often spoken about, the mental health of queer youth in South Africa. We see, the one speaker spoke of a young person who committed suicide just last week. And there's many unaccounted numbers of suicidal queer youth that experience every day. They face discrimination, which leads to depression, anxiety, and all of those things. Issues around public spaces, for example, things like taxi ranks or public hospitals and clinics, where you cannot navigate those spaces freely and openly as a queer person. You have to embody a certain identity that is respected or accepted in terms of the heteronormative system that we find ourselves in. All of those things tells us that the voices of queer youth, particularly, and forgive me for now saturating the issues here, but particularly the trans youth, who still face a lot of marginalization and silencing and voicelessness. And so it's quite a number of issues that are unaccounted for. Discriminations in terms of employment. While I know that youth unemployment in South Africa is high, but we also know that there are forms of unemployment directed directly at queer identifying people, where even when they approach the interview panel, already they are dismissed even before the interview because of how they present, because of how they embody themselves. And then there's also the issue of children who are raised in same-sex parented families, who are excluded in schools and schools programs because those programs are often gendered and heteronormative in nature. It's all of those very seemingly minor things that come together to create an explosive context where queer people find themselves at war with the rest of society.
Obvious, some of the things that Ndumiso was talking about remind me of a conversation we were having not too long ago, but we're talking about the public health system, and we're talking specifically about HIV, AIDS, and TB programs, where from various surveys that were conducted, by organizations like the TAC in partnership with other organizations, something that came out strongly and constantly across the provinces was how people who identified themselves as LGBTQI were actually discriminated against. In other words, their rights to access, to medicines, to healthcare broadly, were violated by public servants time and time again. With and that practice was continuing, survey after survey.
Look, I can imagine now that life is very scary, especially for a lot of queer youth. We've seen what COVID-19 has done by exacerbating the issues that we all face, but also given the fact that queer youth actually face twice those problems. And I think the one that stands out for me, I remember, was the discontinuation of transitioning hormones, right? Also, that goes to show that the issues that we have are actually mounting up on each other. The fact that when I want to go to a clinic because of a specific issue or health issue I'm having, I need to look a certain way. I can't go looking like this, because the first thing that they'll do is question why I look like this, ask if I'm a boy or a girl, when in actual fact I'm there to access something that I have a right to access. And the fact that we are now on Youth Day, we're meeting today, and we speak about human rights issues which in actual fact are things that we shouldn't be questioning at this point, is focusing more on how we can further improve them. The fact that things like accessibility, education, there are schools that still are not serving the queer community in terms of like the queer students there don't feel safe. Then my question is, how are our students expected to learn and receive this education in spaces where they don't feel safe? Whereas I can't even speak about commuting, taking public transport. You get into a taxi and people laugh at the sight of you. And then the question is, are we really entirely safe? Because we are having all these conversations, and the people who are doing the work are these NGOs and these social groups, because they know what needs to be done. But also, the government is not coming to the table and saying, "Hey guys, we already see the work that you do. Where can we assist?" I don't want to lie. It's been a conversation that we've been having. We recently went to a panel discussion with a few countries, Argentina, Mexico, Chile, Colombia, and Spain. And they were praising South Africa for its constitution on queer issues. But the sad reality was when they found out that, yes, we have these great laws, but nothing is really happening. The funny thing is they were saying they saw how progressive South Africa is and the laws that we have, but only to find out that actually nothing is being done. And the fact that youth has to take a stand and say, look, we know what we deserve and we know what we want. But it's also great to see the development of clinics which specifically serve young queer youth, because they are sensitized, they know what queer youth go through. Things like providing them with transport to get to the health service facility and back, things like regular HIV testing, things like talks about just navigating who you are and your lived reality. Because I don't want to lie, being queer in South Africa is a risk. The uncertainty that comes with leaving the house and not knowing if you'll come back. There's been more than 20 queer youth and trans people who have been murdered during COVID-19, even now, some that go unaccounted for. And we've never had the president directly address that. I'm not saying, yes, speak about it in the sense of, yes, we are against queer killings and stuff. Let's sit down, address the issue in its intricacies, because the things that are happening sometimes go unnoticed. And the one thing about it is, yes, educate society, but in the education of society, do more for the queer community, because queer youth who are coming up shouldn't be facing the same challenges that the youth now are facing. Because the sad reality is that might be the case.
Jade, obvious is talking about things that are happening that are not seen. And my example earlier, of state health care facilities was only because it was the first example I could think of on the back of what Dumisa was saying earlier. But in the private sector, there's a lot that happens there that goes unnoticed, to use Obvious's word. When people apply for jobs, for example, and some of the practice, even when you do get a job, how one's life becomes miserable to a point that they decide to opt out, and in worst cases, people even kill themselves.
Yeah, as Ndumisa was saying with the uniform policy, unfortunately, some institutions or corporate also have a uniform policy, So if a black lesbian that is masculine presenting would apply for the job and get the interview, it becomes a problem because she's not necessarily going to wear a skirt, or she's not going a pencil skirt and high heels, So that becomes a problem on its own, first glance and first hand. And when you are inside corporate care or whatever institution that you had applied for, there's then a lot of discrimination, because of your sexual orientation or your gender identity, however it looks like, where top management, middle management, and lower management would be discussing just you and your sexual orientation, and then there's a lot of discrimination that happens within organizations, because the first thing people just always generally ask, even in workspaces, is what do you do in bed? Which is a ridiculous question, but it comes to that. But the biggest thing being that the company needs to be represented well, and therefore, if they do have a uniform policy, it looks like it looks very gendered. There's men, there's women. Women need to wear either a pencil skirt and high heels, and then the men need to wear golf t-shirts and long pants. So there is no opportunity of even looking at that uniform policy within the workspace. So it becomes very difficult for LGBTI person to access work after matric or whatever, because the thoughts around it, are also just damaging, because you think a lot about a certain company that will not hire you because of how you identify and how you look. So that's a big problem and a big challenge.
We quickly running out of time. I'm going to start with you, Mputi, your closing remarks. How do we take these conversations forward and make sure that they have impact?
All right. So these conversations can be taken forward through community engagements, having different stakeholders coming to board. It really needs a multi-sectoral approach if we want to make sure that we get to reach all different members of our communities, and for media houses to also report, on issues of the LGBTI community without choosing other issues over others, because what we see is that we are not seeing enough representation of issues and matters of queer bodies only when it's Pride Month, or only only when it's Pride Month that we see, more people wanting to have conversations, and for corporates really to play their part and to stop commercializing, our struggles as the queer community. Because right now, everyone has a rainbow flag in their company. They're speaking on or advertising, queer people. But the reality is that we know that after Pride Month, they would have forgotten about our existence, and we exist and we matter, and we shall continue to fight the good fight until we are all included with our diverse identities.
Ndumiso, from your vantage point, how do we take this forward? What do we do now?
So one of the things in what is happening in South Africa, Budvuyo, is that we share in a collective trauma. I think one of the things that is needed in South Africa is collective healing from the traumatic stains that we've inherited from our brutal history. But we also need to call on strategic government departments to join in the fight for transformation. And so, for example, the issues around school toilets that are still gendered and sexualized, and where queer people experiences number of violations, including having their skirts and pants pulled down just because other learners want to see their genitals. Those things form part of the agenda for the Department of Basic Education. Things like queer youth who are violated in their homes to the point where they run away and become homeless, and we still don't have safe houses for those young people who remain homeless, is an issue of the Department of Social Development. Sorry. And all of those strategic government departments need to come together with communities and find tailor-made, culturally sensitive ways of addressing these issues that are protective, but also address the trauma that we experience and we live through as a society. Because those things were not really done properly. I mean, we had the TRC, but that did not really reach into the depth of our issues beyond just lip service around reconciliation. Reconciliation was not just in terms of race in South Africa, but in terms of gender, sexuality, and all of those things. And so we need our government departments, but also civil society and the support of government towards civil society in really fighting against discrimination of queer youth.
Obvious, quick closing comments from you?
I couldn't agree more. I think the first thing that we need to understand is the intersectionality of issues faced by the LGBTQI community. But most importantly, the acknowledgement that the community is here 365 days a year, and only addressing issues that are of relation to the queer community and queer youth during June or then maybe October doesn't make sense, because the lived reality is sad. The fact that queer youth always have to fight for their space and fight to be acknowledged shouldn't be the case. I think the step forward now is, because now we know that there are civil unions and NGOs that are already doing the work. The only thing that the government and the broader public can do is reach out to these organizations and say, hey, we have the resources, we have the money, we have the connections. Tell us what you're already doing and how we can even invest in that to make sure that it has a wider reach for queer community, yes, but also wider reach for the sensitization of the society. Because the one thing about it is, yes, we do the work, but the work is only as limited as the resources that we have.
Okay, let me thank all of you. Unfortunately, we have run out of time. Special thanks to Obvious Nomayele, who just spoke there. Dr. Ndumiso Kolongiti, who spoke before him, Ms. Jade Madingwana, as well as Tato Mputi for the conversation. And that's our show for tonight. Do join us again tomorrow evening, same time. Have a good night.